Good morning. Welcome into my home again as we continue with our series on the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus. This is the second in that series. I hope you're enjoying it. If you did not see last week, please go back and see that so that you can have the full impact of this. They are available on Facebook and YouTube. Many of you received a link from me that I had started a YouTube channel. So whichever media you use to watch these, please like, subscribe, turn on notifications so that you can know when I post the next one and you can watch these. And also please share them with others. So this one, second part, is Malchus. When we left off last week, Jesus was in what is called today the Apostles' Grotto. It's a cave there on the by the Garden of Gethsemane on the Mount of Olives. It's 30 feet deep by about 100 feet long, and there's presumably it was where there was an olive press that was used here on the Mount of Olives to process the olives. Either during the time of Jesus or perhaps even before that. I don't know if it was still being used at the time of Jesus. There's a lot of controversy on whether or not it was still in use at that time, but it did exist there in this large cave there on the Mount of Olives, and it was used. Gethsemane actually means olive press, and both the Bible and tradition teaches that Jesus came to this garden very often to get away, for a time of prayer. And at the time of Christ, Gethsemane was a very large garden composed of many huge olive trees. As a matter of fact, the Mount of Olives, the entire side of the Mount of Olives was covered in, and that's hence the name Mount of Olives. It was just composed of olive trees. And so the Garden of Gethsemane at that time was very large. Now today there's only 8 remaining because Rome destroyed, when they destroyed the temple and everything in 70 AD, they went through and they cut down all the trees, destroyed gardens with the intent of keeping the Jews from living there. Now, we talked about last week that actually there was a remnant of Jews that came back there, and then later the final destruction of Jerusalem was finished, and they actually salted the entire area of Jerusalem to try to stop things from ever growing there so the Jews would never come back there. So anyway, there are 8 of these trees left in the Garden of Gethsemane today, and it is said that they sprang up from the roots of these original trees, which would make them thousands of years old, okay? Anyway, in the 4th century, a small church was built around the Apostles' Grotto because it was believed to be the place that Jesus was betrayed by Judas. The grotto has been preserved. Still today, you can visit it, and there's a small church there where they regularly hold services. Jesus returns from his agony in the garden to where he had left the apostles, probably at this cave, and is greeted by Judas, who brings with him a large number, and we talked about that last week, probably between 600 and 1,000 armed soldiers, temple guards, and others that were accusers. They intended to arrest Jesus and bring him back to be questioned by the temple priests and the Sanhedrin court. Judas, who had been paid by this mob to bring them to take this mob to where Jesus was, he kisses Jesus to indicate to the soldiers that this is who he was looking for. This is Jesus. The Gospel according to Mark tells us these soldiers were equipped with for a domestic battle. Jesus' power was legendary. It had been going, when he showed up, multitudes showed up. And remember, just a week before this, they ushered him into Jerusalem pretty well with a hero's welcome. okay, and a whole multitude of people was bringing him in. So they would have been concerned about a riot when they go in to apprehend Jesus. So anyway, Mark 14:42 through 43 says, "Rise, let us go." This is Jesus speaking when he's getting ready to leave the Garden of Gethsemane. Rise up, let us go. Lo, he that betrayeth me is at hand. And immediately, while he yet spake, cometh Judas, one of the 12, and with him a great multitude, with swords and staves, from the chief priests and the scribes and the elders. The word swords is makarah, and it's a dagger-shaped sword that was used for close-range battle, like for stabbing. Okay, staves is the Greek word zulon, and it's a heavy-duty club that was meant to subdue or beat to death an opponent. Okay, Judas betrays Jesus with a kiss to identify him. Jesus asks the ones who are coming for him, "Whom seek ye?" And they replied, "Jesus of Nazareth." Jesus then replies, "I am." And that's John 18 through 4 and 5. We talked about this last week. When Jesus replies with the name of that God told Moses that his name was, "I am," and you can read about that in Exodus 3:14, the soldiers are driven backward by supernatural force of the spoken name of God and fall to the ground as if they were dead. John 18:6. Jesus wanted them to know that that they had no power or authority over him, and he was only being captured because he was allowing it to happen to fulfill Scripture. John 18:7 and 8. Peter, knowing the intent of the enemy, seizes an opportunity to choose to attack while the soldiers were still dazed from their encounter with supernatural force released when Jesus said, "I am." Luke 22:38 tells us that the disciples had 2 swords in their possession as they journeyed to the Mount of Olives. Now, here's the thing. With the fall of the Grecian Empire around 63 BC, which was caused in part by the Maccabean Wars, Maccabean revolts, whichever you want to call them, which was the Jews. This pretty well ended the Grecian Empire, and Rome comes in and just finishes it off, okay, and takes over. And they not only take the area that Greece had once, the territories of Greece, but they actually expand on it, over the next few hundred years, and become, just huge. So anyway, because of the Maccabean Wars and their success in defeating the Grecian Empire, Seleucid Empire it's called, because of that, Rome said, and also there was a few revolts against Rome as they were taking over. Because of this, Rome said, "We're not going to allow them to be armed." So they actually would not allow Jews to possess weapons. So we see here that they had 2 swords. The disciples had 2 swords here, which, was not allowed in the Roman Empire. Okay, so Luke doesn't indicate who had these swords, but from John's writing, it's evident that Peter must have been one of them. John 18:10 says, "Then Simon Peter, having a sword, drew it, and smote the high priest's servant, cut off his right ear. The servant's name was Malchus." Smote is the Greek word peo, and it means to strike violently. Peter was not trying to cut the guy's ear off. He intended to decapitate the man. But he either missed, or what was more likely, Malchus was recovering from this supernatural encounter, and he managed to dodge, and Peter missed and just cut off his ear instead of what he intended to do. Now, did Peter randomly choose to attack Malchus, or was this a strategic vengeance intended here? History tells us that Malchus was the spokesman of the high priest Caiaphas. When Caiaphas rendered judgment, it was Malchus who delivered the message for Caiaphas. Caiaphas spoke out several times against Jesus, and Malchus would have been the one to deliver the message. Caiaphas was a Sadducee, and Sadducees didn't believe in the supernatural, and we talked about this last week. Sadducees considered the Old Testament supernatural events as myth or legend. So when Jesus began to display supernatural signs and wonders, the Sadducees disliked him immediately. Caiaphas took every opportunity to discredit Jesus, and when he did, it would have been through his spokesperson, Malchus. Peter would have known who Malchus was because of the Sadducees' opposition to Jesus. Malchus represented everything Peter hated about the religious community. With Malchus lying on the ground in shock, Peter saw the opportunity to rid Jesus of one of his most vocal enemies. Peter most likely held a bitter grudge toward Malchus and was acting out in anger. The words cut off his right ear, cut off, is the Greek word apokopo, apokopto, which means to amputate. Peter didn't just nick Malchus, he completely removed his right ear. This was a serious action and should have resulted in Peter being arrested and tried by the temple judicial system for injuring a servant of the temple high council. He also could have been put to death by the Roman court for possession of contraband weapons and resisting Roman soldiers. Luke 22:51 tells us that Jesus steps in and cleans up Peter's mess. How often does Jesus have to clean up our mess? This kept Peter and the other disciples from being arrested. Luke 22:51 says, "And Jesus answered and said, Suffer ye thus far. And he touched his ear and healed him." Answered is the Greek word apokomeno, and it means to respond. Jesus quickly responds to the situation that could have become violent. Suffer ye thus far is the Greek iototuhios, and it means permit this one thing. So basically Jesus saying, things are getting out of hand here. Let me correct this situation. And he touched his ear and healed him. The Greek word for healed is iomeo, and it means to completely restore. Matthew 26:53, "Then said Jesus unto him," talking to Peter, "Put up again thy sword into his place, for all they that take up the sword shall perish with the sword." Jesus did not greatly rebuke Peter, but simply tells Peter to put up his sword because actions of violence and anger will lead to retribution with violence and anger. Matthew 26:53, "Thinkest thou," now you need to get this, "Thinkest thou that I cannot pray to my Father, and he shall presently give me more than 12 legions of angels?" Jesus wanted Peter, the other disciples, and the soldiers to understand that he was not helpless, but had at his disposal more than 12 legions of angels. He did not need Peter's help, nor could these soldiers take him by force unless he allowed it. After what they had witnessed, being thrown to the ground by supernatural power, and then Malchus' miraculous healing, I would think that they believed what Jesus said here. Now, a legion, we talked about this last week, a legion is 6,000. So 12 legions would be 72,000 angelic beings. Jesus said he could pray to the Father, and the Father would presently give, which is the Greek word parastami, which means to immediately be at hand, instantly. More than 72,000 angels would instantly be there to assist him. Isaiah 37:36 records an account in which one angel, just one angel, killed 185,000 men in the enemy's camp. All right, so let's do the math here. A legion of angels then could destroy 1,110,000,000 men. Now, if you continue in this math, 12 legions then would be capable of destroying 13,320,000,000 men. That's more than twice the population of the entire earth. Jesus did not need Peter's help, nor was Jesus helpless. Jesus then allows himself to be taken away by the soldiers. Why? Matthew 26:56 tells us why. But all this was done that the scripture of the prophets might be fulfilled. Now we're going to go to Mark 14:50. And they all forsook him and fled. All of the gospel writers state that after these events in Gethsemane, Jesus' disciples abandoned him. With this significantly sized army that was sent to arrest him, it is no surprise that they abandoned him. Now, I chose the Gospel of Mark for this verse because a very interesting event happens right after the disciples leave him. And it's puzzled me my entire life. I mean, whenever I began to study the Bible as a young boy, I read this verse. I don't remember how old I was, probably in my teens, and I read this verse and I thought, "Oh, that's odd." And I tried to figure out what is the significance of this verse, and it never made sense. And I've studied it and studied it. I've talked to people. No one seems to know. Here's the verse. Mark 14:51 and 52. And there followed him a certain young man, having a linen cloth cast about his naked body. And the young man, it's referring to the soldiers here, laid hold on him, and he left the linen cloth and fled from them naked. And I always wondered, why did Mark throw this in? None of the other writers include this fact, but Mark included it for some reason. And I've always wondered why. What is the significance of this boy with the linen cloth wrapped around his naked body? Okay. Now, I don't believe anything in the Bible is accidental. And I don't think Mark would have put this in there if there wasn't something significant about it. Now, I don't know how many Bible translations I have. Bunches and bunches of different Bible translations. I've got some that go all the way back to before the King James was written. But none of them that I've ever looked at shed any light on this event. I've got, I don't know how many commentators I've got. Commentaries from notable Bible scholars all the way back to the 18th century. And yet, all of them that I've ever read, they just don't show a whole lot of, they either don't speak of this or their explanation just doesn't make sense. Now, current day scholars seem to think, lean toward the idea that this young man was the keeper of Gethsemane and that the commotion with the soldiers woke him up and he rushed out to see what was going on. Okay, now, before the 18th century, most of them say that this was just a metaphoric event. And it didn't really happen. It was just a metaphor, okay? But here's the thing. It's in the Bible. It happened, okay? It's not a metaphor, okay? So what is the significance of this? The problem with the theory of current day scholars that this was the man that kept the Garden of Gethsemane is that it was a linen cloth, and linen was very rare. He would have not taken this off of a dead body, okay, because Jews were not allowed to touch dead bodies. They were unclean when they did. Okay, so here's the three things that linen was used for. It was very expensive garment, okay, very expensive cloth, okay. The rich used it for undergarments and for bedding. It was used in the temple for special garments for the priest, and the main thing that linen was used for was to wrap the dead for burial. Okay, so as I'm preparing to teach for this, I ran into another explanation. Actually, I saw it on TV. A preacher on TV was talking about it. I don't remember who it was, but he said something that I had never considered. And so I began to research it, and I believe that he was right. And I believe this explains why Mark included this in Scripture. At the base of the Mount of Olives, the base of Mount Olives is the beginning of the Kedron Valley, okay? And there are a large number of sepulchres that are hewn into the mountainside, okay? These were used by the rich and by the temple priests for burial, okay? I believe this young man had recently died and been buried probably even earlier that day. And he was placed in one of the sepulchres. And when Jesus proclaimed, "I am," and the supernatural power of God threw these soldiers backwards into the ground, I believe this boy was resurrected, just as Lazarus was when Jesus called him forth. Now, I think probably when he was resurrected here, in his confusion of what was going on, he heard all this noise, and so he goes toward this commotion. And by the time he reaches the soldiers who are leading Jesus away, the disciples had fled, and the soldiers, probably thinking that this young man was one of the disciples, grabs him, and his burial clothes rip away or fall away, and the young man escapes. This would make this one of the last miracles of Jesus, and would certainly warrant why Mark included it in the account of the Gospel of Mark. I can't prove this, but it just makes sense. Everything fits. Supernatural power had been released. The sepulchres in the vicinity of where this happens. A young man in linen, which was used mostly for grave cloth. He would not have had linen on him for any other reason. So you decide. May God bless you. May God bless this reading of His Word. Just go with God this week and be blessed. And please share this. Please like it. All those things so that this will go out and other people will see this also. God bless you. Have a great week.